Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my friend. We're going to go with the 10 best thrash metal bands who weren't the big four. Okay, the big four, I've said this multiple times. Metallica, Megadeth, Slayer, Anthrax. Really? Anthrax? How is Anthrax? I'm not saying they're a bad band. I'm not saying they're a great band either. But there are a plethora of other bands that were out at that time that should have been there with Anthrax. I have no idea why Anthrax. I don't know if they just needed a fourth. It couldn't be the big three. It couldn't be the big five. It was the big four. The big four. Anthrax. I have no idea why Anthrax is there. You may disagree with me. But any number of bands. And the first couple that come to mind are Overkill and Exodus. Then there's Testament. I could go on. But anyway, I've never gotten why Anthrax is on there. So 10 best thrash metal bands who weren't the big four. Keep the other three. But my God, replace Anthrax. But they're not gonna. You know they're not gonna. Okay. Anyway, let's go. As a music genre, the boom time for early heavy metal was born in the 60s and 70s as bands began experimenting with increasingly distorted and intense sounds. The metal subgenre of thrash didn't begin to emerge until the early 1980s as the influence of the drum techniques innovated by new wave of British heavy metal, like bands like Mötorhead, met the aggressive energy of the nascent hardcore punk scene. Yet you also got speed metal in there, and like speed metal and thrash metal were sort of kind of intertwined, and there's different rules to each, but they just sort of kind of melded together. But eventually all of it fell under the umbrella of thrash. 1981 saw the formation of each member of thrash metal's big four: Anthrax, Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, as well as the first use of the term trash metal in Kerrang! Magazine. Yet, in the decades since, thrash has expanded to encompass a huge number of bands and styles, many of which are just as fantastically hardcore as any of the big four. Starting with number 10, Shadows Fall. Yeah, Shadows Fall. Great band. While this New England metal band's first few albums were more in the realm of melodic death metal or metalcore, after their 2000 sophomore release of One Blood drew too many comparisons to Sweden melodic's death scene and a change of drummers, Shadows Fall shifted to a more thrash and power metal inspired sound. And that's where I got into them, man, the art of balance, without a doubt. Their first album using this sound, 2002's The Art of Balance, was favorably received by critics despite some legitimate confusion about the choice to close the album with a cover of Pink Floyd's Welcome to the Machine. Sadly, 2012's Fire from the Sky was Shadows Fall's final studio release. After that, the band fell apart. First, guitarist Jonathan Donis left to join Anthrax in 2013. Then, after a farewell tour from 2014 to 2015, Shadows Fall, others members split and to join various other projects. 2021 saw the band reunite to play a show at the Worcester Palladium near their hometown of Boston. And December 2024 saw the band release their first studio material in over a decade in the single of In the Gray. Number 9, Death Angel. Yeah, Death Angel. Perfect choice. Kind of second generation thrash, but perfect choice. Bay Area thrashers Death Angel only missed out being counted among the big four by a matter of months and spent much of the 80s touring with and opening for their peers, particularly Metallica. An unfortunate tour bus crash in Arizona in 1990 left the band shaken and drummer Andy Galeon severely injured, forcing the band to cancel it and turn down several major tour appearances, eventually splitting up in 1991. Thankfully, shortly after reuniting for a benefit show in 2001, Death Angel returned to the studio and began releasing albums again in 2004. And those albums, way more fierce than their early material. Bit different, way more aggressive. Not bad albums, but they were a different band. Even with their ninth studio album, 2019's Humanicide, Death Angel still shred like it's 1982, and they're playing in the Daly City Garage. Vocalist Mark Osgueda's vocals seem to only get better with age, defying all understanding of how vocal cords work, and the synchronized gallop of Grab Castavani and Tad Aguilar's guitars is sure to get anyone's head banging. Death Angel was able to resurrect itself despite the odds, and that determination to rock still shines through their music. Number 8, Exodus. And yes, Exodus. Exodus should have been identified way before Anthrax. One of the earliest original generation of Bay Area thrash bands, Exodus was actually the first band guitarist Kirk Hammett played in before Metallica poached him in 1983 to replace Dave Mustaine. Over the decades, numerous lineup changes and hiatuses have left the band with only one original member, drummer Tom Hunting, who left twice but has remained a fixture since 2007. Despite the turnover, Exodus remains as heavy as ever. In fact, multiple journalists, as well as members of thrash bands both among and outside the Big Four, often maintain that Exodus should be named as one of the Big Five. Dave Mustaine even suggested back in 1990 that Exodus, not Anthrax, should be in that elite club. I agree. Regardless of which label or generation of metal you apply to the band, though, Exodus still shred. And their latest studio album, 2021's Persona Non Grata, showing that time has not diluted their ability to thrash. No doubt about it. Number 7, Overkill. Yes, freaking Overkill. Threw out that name earlier. While many of the earliest thrash metal bands formed in and around California, San Francisco Bay Area at the start of the 1980s, Overkill hailed from America's other coast, specifically New Jersey. Also, unlike most of their peers, Overkill have never disbanded. Although 45 years of lineup changes mean the band only has 2 original members left, bassist Dee Dee Verney, lead vocalist Bobby Blitz Ellsworth, Overkill has also never gone more than 4 years between studio album releases, meaning their most recent, 2023 Scorch, was their 20th full album. And Overkill, I don't think they've ever released a bad album, in my opinion. There have been albums that aren't as great as others. They will walk the line of experimentation with, like, I Hear Black, and then they'll bounce back with WFO, and then From the Underground. But since Ironbound, they've been really consistent in a type of sound that they're carrying now. Part of what may have held Overkill back from being considered one of the Big Four is their sound. Not that it's bad by any means, but they never had the stylistic variety of peers like Metallica. Yet, the lack of experimentation comes from the simple fact that Overkill found a sound that worked for them and have simply refined it over the years. Again, I do think there's experimentation. Like I said, From the Underground, I Hear Black. What is it? Their first single, video single, was In Union We Stand from their first album for Atlantic, Taking Over. And it was very different from the rest of the album. It kind of had more of a Judas Priest United feel as opposed to the thrashier things that were going on, taking over, like Rotten to the Core, Deny the Cross, stuff like that. So they do have, they are a bit diverse. I think they're kind of being heavy-handed with saying they don't experiment. I think they do experiment. I think they do show up. They're just a tremendously gifted band. I've seen them a handful of times. Never a bad show either. Sometimes considered the Mötorhead of thrash metal, apt considering Mötorhead's second album Overkill was the source of their name, Overkill remains fast, aggressive, and heavy. Okay, number 6, Sepultura. I like Sepultura, disagree with this entry. Formed in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, and with a name that means grave in Portuguese, Sepultura is one of the most enduring and successful bands from thrash metal's second wave in the mid-'80s. The band's last founding member, Igor Calavera, departed in 2006. He and his brother Max have been inspired to found the band after the back-to-back events of their father's tragic death by heart attack and then hearing Black Sabbath's album Volume 4 later that same day. Wow, lose their dad and then discover Volume 4 on the same day. That is a morbid soundtrack of a tragic day. Heavily influenced by earlier thrash bands as well, particularly Slayer, Sepultura have constantly straddled the line between straightforward thrash and helping innovate the modern incarnation of death metal. Their Brazilian origin is also apparent in their occasional use of Latin and samba beats, as well as the musical traditions of Brazil's indigenous people, such as the Exponte tribe from Brazil's state of Mato Grosso, who actually participated in recording of 1996's album Roots. Yeah, that's when I dropped out, because Roots just sounded like Sepultura doing Korn. AllMusic's Eduardo Rivadavia called them perhaps the most important heavy metal band of the 90s. Yeah, right up there with Pantera. And he absolutely wasn't wrong. Sodom. Yeah, no, maybe. While the big four are internationally undisputed, there's also the big four of Teutonic Thrash, a quartet of bands who all emerged from Germany in parallel with thrash metal's evolution in America. Sodom, one of those German bands, is one of the best-selling thrash metal bands of all time, having sold over 2 million records since they got started. Really? Like more than Creator? Destruction? Huh. With a catalog of 17 studio albums, 3 live albums, 2 compilations, and 7 EPs, they've been almost as consistent in their release schedule as Overkill, although it's just now over 4 years since their last studio release, 2020's Genesis. Sodom's earliest work is redolent with the satanic and occult themes mostly generally associated with heavy metal, but 1987's Persecution Mania saw them shift their artistic focus to a heavy emphasis on anti-war messaging. Of particular note is 1989's Agent Orange, an unrelenting album with drips with condemnation of fascist and imperialist violence. It was also one of the first thrash albums to chart in Germany. And that being stated, in 1989, we had gone from Ronald Reagan, 8 years of republicanism, to the next 4 years of republicanism with George Bush. And George Bush, more so than Reagan, was a pro-war president and, started wars because he was perceived as a weakling. So it really did ignite a lot of political upheaval, especially in thrash and speed metal, where they were commenting on how pro-war America had become. Number 4, Creator. Of course, Creator. Another of the Teutonic Big Four. Creator was both generally considered one of the best international thrash bands and also one of the most underground for some time. Even though they signed with major label Epic Records in 1988, it wasn't until 2012's Phantom Antichrist, their first release on German metal punk label Nuclear Blast, that they began to chart consistently. Their last sounding Creator album before they started experimenting would have been Coma of Souls, and then they went on a tour with Biohazard. Next album, Renewal. The following album, Cause for Conflict, Endorama. They were experimenting. They were trying to find something new, and God bless Malay and all that if they want to experiment. But it was really Violent Revolution where they came back to their traditional sound. Maybe Phantom Antichrist is when they started charting, but they returned to their sound with Violent Revolution. Follow-up album Gods of Violence made it to number 1 on the German charts when it was released in 2017. While Creator's overall vibe is similar to their peers Destruction and Sodom, they have shifted to a slightly more melodic sound in recent years. They have beautiful guitar solos. That is one thing about Creator, is there's this really aggressive thrash, and Millie's voice is just, it's just intense. And then they'll have, not all the time, but I would dare say half the time, they'll just shift. When they go into the guitar solo, it is sweeping. It's just beautiful melody, and then right back into the madness. It's fantastic work. As well as experimenting with some industrial and gothic metal along the way, aside from the usual influences of other metal bands that tend to make up the DNA of a thrash band. They also notably have cited post-punk goth legend Susie and the Banshees as having a major impact on their sound. Yeah, you can hear it too. Number 3, Destruction. Again, another Teutonic one. Originally named Night of Demon, Destruction is another key member of the Teutonic Big Four. Lineup changes left them struggling, even after wildly successful international tours with other thrash bands in the late 80s. The band has disowned much of their material from the mid-90s, which was recorded with their third vocalist, Thomas Rosenmerkel, and released independently. Rosenmerkel's departure after 1998's The Least Successful Human Cannonball saw the band find their groove again, and founding bassist Shimmer's return led to the band signing with Nuclear Blast and prodigiously churning out albums out through the 2000s. Destruction's 17th studio album, Birth of Malice, is set for release March 7, 2025, and has seen the release of 3 singles so far: Destruction, Fast as a Shark, and No Kings, No Masters. I wonder if Fast as a Shark is an Accept cover. The newest material still shreds just as hard as any of the band's thrash classics, many of which have been collected and even re-recorded for the compilation albums Thrash Anthems and Thrash Anthems 2. And at number 2, Vector. Really, they're skipping over some bands here. That's just me, because I know who number 1's going to be, and there it is. They're skipping over some bands here. That's all I can say. We move on to Vector. Okay. Formed in Tempe, Arizona in 2002 under the name Locrian, the band slowly became popular in their local metal scene and changed their name to Vector in 2004. Several years of working the grind, playing local shows, and acting as the opening act for bigger names like Testament and Iced Earth let the band refine their sound and sign with Heavy Artillery Records, resulting in their first studio album, Black Future, in 2009. How is this their first studio album is in 2009? You think they should be part of the Big Four? This is ridiculous. In 2012, when Heavy Artillery sold their stable to British indie label Earache, Vector came along for the ride, playing their first European show in 2013. 2016 saw Vector release a brilliantly technical Terminal Redo, with an almost immediately followed by the band's dissolution, which may have been influenced by frontman Dave DeSanto's issues with alcohol. 2019 saw DeSanto taken to family court over allegations of domestic abuse. DeSanto and original guitarist Eric Nelson reformed the band with a new lineup in mid-2020, releasing a split EP with Dutch thrashers Cryptosis in 2021. However, the domestic abuse allegations emerged, causing label Century Media to drop them, and the band has struggled to find support since. And of course, at number 1, the band that we all knew was going to pop up, Testament. And I don't get this. Testament make all the sense in the world. But if you're bringing up bands like Vector, then why aren't you bringing up bands like Flotsam and Jetsam? Flotsam and Jetsam make all the sense in the world. Dark Angel. I mean, come on. I mean, you mention Anthrax, but you don't mention SOD or MOD. And you don't mention, even though they only had 2 albums, Holy Terror. I mean, Holy Terror were amazing. And Ex-Hoarder is another one that comes to mind from that era. Talking about a band that didn't even come out till the 21st century really makes no sense, especially when you bring up Destruction and Creator and you don't mention Coroner. And hell, back in the day when you look at Metallica, Megadeth, and everything, where's Voivod? Sadus. Yeah, just another band. And I'm going to say this, another band, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that should be in the Big Four, at least initially they should have been considered, if not completely adopted, is Metal Church. How do you mention Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer and not mention Metal Church? I mean, my God, they opened for them. Metallica opened for Metal Church. I mean, it's just, Metal Church were the kings. Yeah, and bands, just because you're the first doesn't mean you're the best, but how do you have a Big Four without Metal Church? Rest in peace, David Wayne. Rest in peace, Mike Howe. Metal Church, tremendously gifted band, put out just album after album of superb heavy metal. No matter if it was David singing, Mike singing, Ronnie Monroe singing. I mean, just a fantastic heavy metal, thrash metal band. So anyway, it's weird. I know, throwing out a bunch of names. All those names that bang around in my little metal brain. But anyway, number 1, Testament, active from 1983 until the present. Another of the early 80s thrash legends from East Bay. Testament were originally known as Legacy until they were forced to change their name while recording their first album, 1987's The Legacy, as there were so many bands with that name on the scene at the time. Their first album, released on Atlantic Records, was a smash hit within the metal scene, and their first music video for the single Over the Wall got a significant amount of rotation on MTV's metal-focused video program, Headbangers Ball. No, it didn't. No, it didn't. It did not get a significant amount of rotation. I saw Pearl Jam and Alice in Chains videos more so than I saw that Testament video back in the day. The video that did get a lot of play from Testament, Headbangers Ball, Practice What You Preach. That got a lot of play. Souls of Black got a lot of play. Nobody's Fault got a lot of play. I barely ever saw the video for Over the Wall. Testament have since enshrined themselves as one of the most enduring and influential thrash bands outside of the Big Four, frequently compared musically to Metallica. Although without the strange 90s dad rock phase, Testament have influenced innumerable younger metal bands. Yeah, they didn't go through a 90s dad phase. They got freaking heavier. Dear God, they got heavier. When Alex Skolnick left originally, Eric was like, shit, I can write thrash metal again. And they did. I mean, he leaves after The Ritual. They come back with Low, and dear God, man, Dogface Gods, Yuraskadoshi, the title track, really awesome album. And you had James Murphy playing on it from Disincarnate and Death. It was tremendously good album, and they just kept going, just kept putting out amazing albums after that. Never went back to that sort of lighter heavy metal sound. And yet none can eclipse their ability to absolutely shred even after 4 decades. Now signed to Nuclear Blast, Testament are currently working on their yet untitled 14th album, which should release sometime in 2025. So that's the end of my list. I appreciate you listening. Appreciate you listening to me go off and do my little metal tangents. But I saw this article pop up based on my last video, and I really wanted to address it because again, you can love or hate Anthrax. I just don't believe they qualify to be in the Big Four. So anyway, that's my little rant. Thanks for listening to me. See you in the next one. Early 1980s, as the influence of the drum technique innovated by new wave of British heavy metal bands. I just said that, metal